Oh, you're my best friend, Sperry. I just love you. I think you're really gonna like this story. Oh, look. Okay, sit right here. Hello. Last December, I decided to go to London because I was in the mood for roasted chestnuts, and they make the best ones in the whole world there. I also decided that I would take an ocean liner instead of a plane because it takes a lot longer, but there's something very romantic and adventurous about going across the ocean on a ship. One night, very late, we were sailing through the deepest, darkest part of the Atlantic Ocean. I was sharing a chocolate milkshake and stories of my adventures with the ship's captain in the dining room. Suddenly, there was a huge crash, and the ship lurched to a stop. We had hit an iceberg. Everyone on the ship started running around screaming and putting on life jackets. Before long, though, we realized we had nothing to worry about. Thanks to global warming, our ship was just fine, but the iceberg sank. Everyone gathered on deck, and we watched as the iceberg rolled over and sank slowly into the sea. As we turned toward England, I noticed a polar bear clinging to the last piece of the iceberg and waving for help. We sent a lifeboat to rescue him. He was scared and cold, but unhurt. And later, he wrote a best-selling book about his adventures called Never Go to London with a Bear Behind. Even though everything turned out okay, the captain decided to stay up all night and watch for any other icebergs. I volunteered to stay up with him and read stories to keep him awake because I'm quite noble that way, and he was the third most handsome man I had ever met. Now, this story that I'm going to read to you now was the captain's favorite story, and it's a very exciting one. It's called Faithful John by the Brothers Grimm. There was once upon a time an old king who was ill and thought to himself, I am lying on what must be my deathbed. Then he said, Tell Faithful John to come to me. Faithful John was his favorite servant, and was so called because he had for his whole long life been so true to him. When therefore he came beside the bed, the king said to him, Most faithful John, I feel my end approaching, and have no anxiety except about my son. He is still of tender age, and cannot always know how to guide himself. If you do not promise me to teach him everything that he ought to know, and to be his foster father, I cannot close my eyes in peace. Then answered Faithful John, I swear I will not forsake him, and will serve him with devotion, even if it should cost me my life. And at this the old king said, Now I may die in comfort and peace. And then he added, After my death you shall show him the whole estate, all of the castle, all the chambers, halls, and vaults, and all the treasures which lie therein. But the last chamber, in the long gallery, in which hangs the picture of the princess of the golden dwelling, shall you not show. If he sees that picture, he will fall violently in love with her, and will drop down in a swoon and go through great danger for her sake. Therefore you must protect him from that. And when Faithful John had once more given his promise to the old king about this, the king said no more, but laid his head on his pillow and died. When the old king had been carried to his grave, Faithful John told the young king all that he had promised his father on his deathbed, and said, This promise will I assuredly keep, and will be faithful to you as I have been faithful to him, and even if it should cost me my life. When the period of mourning was over, Faithful John said to him, It is now time that you should see your inheritance. I will show you your father's palace. And then he took him everywhere, up and down, and let him see all the riches and the magnificent rooms. Only there was one room which he did not open, that in which hung the dangerous picture. The picture was so placed that when the door was open, one looked straight on it, and it was so splendidly painted that it seemed to breathe and live, and there was nothing more charming or more beautiful in the whole world. The young king noticed, however, that Faithful John always walked past this one door, and said, Why do you never open this one for me? Oh, there is something within it, John replied, which would terrify you. But the king answered, I have seen all the palace, and I want to know what is in this room also, and he went and he tried to break the door down by force. Faithful John held him back and said, I promised your father before his death that you should not see that which is in this chamber. It might bring the greatest of misfortune on you and on me. Ah, no, replied the young king. If I do not go in, it will be my certain destruction. I must know what it is. I should have no rest day or night until I've seen it with my own eyes. I shall not leave the place until you have unlocked the door, and as your new king, I demand it. Faithful John saw that there was no help for it, and with a heavy heart and many sighs, sought out the key from the great bunch. When he opened the door, he went in first, and thought by standing before him that he could hide the portrait so that the king could not see what was in front of him. But what good was that? The king stood on tiptoe and saw it over his shoulder, and when he saw the portrait of the maiden, which was so magnificent and shone with gold and precious stones, he fell fainting to the ground. Faithful John took him up, carried him to his bed, and sorrowfully thought, Oh, the misfortune that has befallen us, Lord, what will be the end of it? And then he strengthened him with wine until he came to himself again, and the first words the king said were, Ah, that beautiful portrait, whose is it? That is the princess of the golden dwelling, answered Faithful John. And then the king continued, My love for her is so great that if all the leaves on all the trees were tongues, they would not declare it. I will give my life to win her. You are my faithful John. You must help me. The faithful servant considered within himself for a long time how to set about the matter, for it was difficult even to obtain a sight of the princess of the golden dwelling. At length he thought of a way, and said to the king, Everything that she has about her is of gold, tables, chairs, dishes, glasses, bowls, and household furniture. Among your treasures are 5 tons of gold. Let one of the goldsmiths of the kingdom fashion these into all manner of vessels and utensils, into all kinds of birds, wild beasts, and strange animals, such as may please her, and we will go there with them and try our luck. The king ordered all the goldsmiths to be brought to him, and they had to work night and day until at last the most splendid things were prepared. And when everything was stowed on board a ship, Faithful John put on the clothes of a merchant, and the king was forced to do the same in order to make himself quite unrecognizable. And then they sailed across the sea, and sailed on until they came to the town wherein dwelt the princess of the golden dwelling. Faithful John bade the king stay behind on the ship and wait for him. Perhaps I shall bring the princess with me, said he, and therefore see that everything is in order. Have the golden vessel set out and the whole ship decorated. And then he gathered together in his apron all kinds of golden things, went on shore, and walked straight to the royal palace. When he entered the courtyard of the palace, a beautiful girl was standing there by the well, with 2 golden buckets in her hand, drawing water with them. And when she was just turning round to carry away the sparkling water, she saw the stranger, and asked who he was. So he answered, I am a merchant. And he opened his apron and let her look in. And then she cried, Oh, what beautiful golden things! And put her pails down and looked at the golden wares one after another. And then the girl said, The princess must see these. She has such great pleasure in golden things that she will buy all of them. She took him by the hand and led him upstairs, for she was the waiting maid. And there they came upon the princess, who was as beautiful in life as she was in the picture. And when the princess saw the wares, she was quite delighted, and said, Oh, well, they are so beautifully worked that I will buy them all from you. But Faithful John said, I am only the servant of a rich merchant. The things I have here are not to be compared with those my master has in his ship. Well, they are the most beautiful and valuable things that have ever been made in gold. When she wanted to have everything brought to her, he said, Well, there are so many of them that it would take a great many days to do that, and so many rooms would require to exhibit them. Well, your house is just not big enough. Then her curiosity and her longing were still more excited, until at last she said, "Conduct me to your ship. I will go there myself and behold the treasures of your master." At this, faithful John was quite delighted, and he led her to the ship. And when the king saw her, he perceived that her beauty was even greater than the picture had represented it to be, and thought his heart would burst with joy. And then she boarded the ship, and the king led her within. Faithful John, however, remained with the helmsman and ordered the ship to be pushed off, saying, "Set all sail till it fly like a bird in the air." Within, the king showed the princess the golden vessels, every one of them, every wild beast and strange animal. Many hours went by whilst she was seeing everything, and in her delight she did not observe that the ship was sailing away. After she had looked at the last, she thanked the merchant and wanted to go home. But when she came to the side of the ship, she saw that it was on the high seas far from land, and hurrying onwards with all sails set. "Ah!" she cried in alarm. "I am betrayed. I am carried away and have fallen into the power of a merchant. I would rather die." The king, however, seized her hand and said, "I am not a merchant. I am a king, and of no lesser origin than you are, and I have carried you away without your permission. That has come to pass because of my great love for you. The first time I looked upon your portrait, I must confess, I fell fainting to the ground." When the princess of the golden dwelling heard this, she was comforted, and her heart was drawn to him. They talked for many hours, and before long she was contented to be his wife. And so it happened, while they were sailing onwards toward the deep sea, that faithful John, who was sitting on the fore part of the vessel making music, saw 3 enchanted ravens in the air, which came flying towards him. At this he stopped playing and listened to what they were saying to each other, for understanding the language of birds was a skill he knew well. One cried, "Oh, well, there he is, carrying home the princess of the golden dwelling." "Yes," replied the second, "but he has not truly won her yet." Said the third, "But he has won her. She is sitting beside him on the ship." And then the first began again, and cried, "Oh, what good will that do him? When they reach land, a chestnut horse will meet him, and the prince will want to mount it. But if he does, it will run away with him and rise up into the air, and he will never see the maiden again." Spoke the second raven, "But is there no escape?" "Oh, yes, if someone else mounts it swiftly and takes out the pistol which he will find in its holster and shoots the horse dead, the young king is saved. But who knows that? And whoever does know it and tells it to him will be turned to stone from the toe to the knee." "Oh, then," said the second enchanted raven, "I know more still, that even if the horse is killed, the young king will not keep his bride. When they go to the castle together, a royal wedding garment will be lying there upon a box, and looking as if it were woven of gold and silver. It is, however, nothing but sulphur and pitch, and if the king puts it on, it will burn him to the very bone and marrow." Said the third raven, "Alas, he is cursed. There is no escape at all." "Oh, yes," replied the second. "If anyone with gloves on seizes the garment and throws it into the fire and burns it, well, the young king will be saved." "But what good will that do? Whosoever knows it and tells it to him, half his body will become stone from the knee to the heart." "Then," said the third raven, "I know still more. Even if the bridal garment be burnt, the young king will still not have his bride. After the wedding, at the ball, when the young queen is dancing, she will suddenly turn pale and fall down as if dead. And if someone does not lift her up and draw 3 drops of blood from her right breast and spit it out again, she will die. But if anyone who knows that were to declare it, he would become stone from the crown of his head to the sole of his foot." "Well, there's no escape," repeated the second raven. "No escape." And then the birds spread their wings and flew onwards. Faithful John had understood well everything that they said, but from that time forth he became quiet and sad. For if he concealed what he had heard from his master, well, the latter would be beset with tragedy, and if he disclosed it to him, he himself must sacrifice his own life. At length, however, he said to himself, I will save my master, even if it bring destruction on myself. When therefore they came to shore, all happened as been foretold by the ravens, and a magnificent chestnut horse sprang forward. Good, said the king, he shall carry me to my palace, and was about to mount it when Faithful John got before him, jumped quickly on it, drew the pistol out of the holster, and shot the horse dead. Then the other attendants of the king, who were jealous of Faithful John, cried, Oh, well, how shameful! To kill that beautiful animal, that was to have carried the king to his palace. But the king said, Hold your peace and leave him alone. He is my most faithful John, and I trust him. Who knows what good may come of this? Then they went to the palace, and in the hall there stood a box, and therein lay the bridal garments, looking as if it was made of gold and silver. The young king went towards it, and was about to take hold of it, but Faithful John pushed him away, seized it with gloves on, carried it quickly to the fire, and burnt it. The other attendants again began to murmur, and said, Well, behold his disrespect. Now he's even burning the king's bridal garment. But the young king said, Who knows what good he may have done? Leave him alone. He is my most faithful John, and I trust him. And now the wedding was solemnized. The ball began, and the bride and groom danced. Faithful John was watchful of the princess, and suddenly she turned pale and fell to the ground as if she were dead. On this he ran hastily to her, lifted her up, and bore her into a chamber. Then he laid her down, and knelt and sucked the 3 drops of blood from her right breast, and spat them out. Immediately she breathed again, and recovered herself. But the young king had seen this, and not knowing why Faithful John had done this to his bride, was angry, and cried, Throw him into the dungeon! Next morning Faithful John was condemned to die, and led to the gallows, and when he stood on high, and was about to be executed, he said, Every one who is to die is permitted before his end to make one last speech. May I too claim the right? Yes, answered the king, it shall be granted unto you. Then said Faithful John, I am unjustly condemned, and have always been true to you. And he related how he had overheard the conversation of the ravens when on the sea, and how he had been obliged to do all these things in order to save his master. Then the king cried, O most faithful John, pardon, pardon, bring him down. But as Faithful John spoke the last word, he had fallen down lifeless and turned to stone. Thereupon the king and the queen suffered great anguish, and the king said, Ah, how poorly have I repaid his loyalty! And he ordered the stone figure to be taken up and placed in his bedroom beside his bed. And as often as he looked on it, he wept and said, Oh, if only I could bring you back to life again, my most faithful John. Some time passed, and the queen bore twins, 2 sons who grew fast and were her delight. Once when the queen was at church, and the king was sitting with his 2 children, playing beside him, he looked at the stone figure again, sighed, and full of grief, cried, Oh, I would give anything if I could but bring you to life again, my most faithful John. As he wept, the stone suddenly began to speak, and said, You can bring me to life again, if you will use for that purpose what is dearest to you. And then cried the king, I will give everything I have in the world for you. The stone continued, If you will cut off the heads of your 2 children with your own hand and sprinkle me with their blood, I shall be restored to life. The king was terrified when he heard that he himself must kill his dearest children, but he thought of Faithful John's great loyalty and knew how he had given his life for him. With great anguish he drew his sword, and with his own hand cut off the children's heads. And when he had touched the stone with their blood, life returned to it, and Faithful John stood once more safe and healthy before him. He said to the king, Your sacrifice shall not go unrewarded, and took the heads of the children, put them on again, and rubbed the wounds with their blood, at which they became whole again immediately, and jumped about and went on playing as if nothing had happened. Then the king was full of joy, And when the Queen returned from church, she saw faithful John alive and said, "It's a miracle. Today my prayers have been answered." And then they dwelt together in much happiness until their death many years later. The end.